everyone. Welcome back to Sunday afternoon Ballroom 1. Our next speaker is Reid, a champion in open source and community tech. I had the pleasure of volunteering with her at GovHack, which she ran in Geelong in 2015 and 2016. That feels like a lifetime ago with many job and career changes for both of us. Kathy has started a PhD and is now at Mozilla. Kathy is here to introduce the Mozilla Data Collective.
David. What a beautiful introduction, David. Thank you so much. So my talk today is deceptively simple. I want to give you control over your data. I want to give you control over how that data is used and give you the choice in who gets that data and what they do with it. But before I get to that, there's three quick things I want to do. I want to acknowledge country, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, and I want to thank the volunteers who make this conference possible. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I also acknowledge that I've travelled over Wurrung country today from Geelong to be here. And I particularly acknowledge that the languages once spoken on this country for 2,000 generations lie sleeping. I'll be giving my talk today in English. Surprise. But it's something that we don't often consider, we don't often think about it. There are over 250 languages still spoken in Australia today. And for some of those languages, the speakers are the last speakers of those languages. Hi, I'm Reid, and I'm an engineer with Mozilla's Common Voice platform, where I work with speech data in hundreds of languages, helping to make speech technologies work better for the 8 billion voices in the world. Common Voice data, as you might know, is public domain, CC0, and it's completely free of charge, which works really well for researchers and speech technologists who work on ASR and speech recognition systems. But that licensing, that one-size-fits-all, doesn't work for all communities. It doesn't necessarily give them control over how their data is used, what it's used for, or where the value of that data goes. And I'll be speaking a little bit more about that later in the talk. The third thing I want to do today, I'm also a doctoral candidate, as David suggested, at the School of Cybernetics at ANU, and I promise I'll finish my PhD this year. I also want to give thanks to our volunteers, because it's our volunteers that make PyCon AU happen. And without volunteers like Ophelia, Noah, Ovidiu, Zephyr, David, our ticket prices would be 2 times or 3 times what they are. And I'd like you to join me in thanking them for their help and labour today. Thank you. You're all superstars. And that takes me to the talk proper. My talk today, surprisingly, is in 3 parts. In part 1, I'm going to talk about tokenomics, why human-generated data is so valuable for machine learning. We're going to talk about what's a token. I'm going to introduce terms like the token crisis and peak token, and I'm going to talk about the advent of an internet filled with synthetic, low-quality data, and you might know this as AI slop. In the second part of the talk, I'm going to cover how the hunt for tokens is affecting the open web and the exploitative token harvesting practices that are making all of our lives a misery. They're bulldozing rights, and if you saw Lily Ryan's incredible talk earlier today, you'll know that they don't represent everybody on the internet. And in part 3 of the talk, I asked the question, is there a better way? And yes, we think there is. I'm going to introduce a new platform, the Mozilla Data Collective. And it's about ensuring that control of data lies with the people who produce, who create, who curate that data. It's a little bit of a different paradigm, and I'll be unpacking that. So, excuse me, why is human-generated data so valuable for machine learning? And it all starts here with tokens. Tokens are building blocks of data. They're created by chopping up datasets in different ways and linking those tokens together through relationships. And this usually happens with a program called a tokenizer. Now, I don't have time to give you a 101 natural language processing course in 24 minutes, so I'm just going to cover this in one slide. This is one example of a tokenizer. This is byte pair tokenization, and it's the type of tokenizer that's usually used with something like GPT, so it's a very common form of tokenization. And what's happening here is that initially the sentence, "the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog," is split up into letters, into characters. You can see that in step 1. And then the tokenizer looks for the most frequent pairing of characters. So in step 1, it's recognising that T plus H is a very common occurrence. So it squishes T plus H together to create a token. Then in the next step, it does another pass. And it realises that T plus H plus E is also a very common occurrence. So it squishes TH plus E, which you might know as the word the, into a token. And it repeats this process quite a few times. And generally what happens is that the tokenizer ends up tokenizing the characters, the letters, into words or parts of words. And that's really important for what comes next. Machine learning architectures, like transformers, create connections and relationships between tokens. I'm not going to talk today about how they do that. If you're really interested in that, come grab me at break time or look up transformer architecture and it shows you how it uses attention to do that. But these relationships encode things like, it's the quick brown fox that jumped over the lazy dog, not the lazy dog that jumped over the quick brown fox. And it's the relationships between tokens that enable generative AI to create outputs in response to prompts, because they're essentially next token predictors. And what we can see in this diagram is what's known as vector embeddings. It's essentially how closely related tokens are to one another. It's why if I say king is to queen as prince is to... Thank you. You're able to do that pattern matching. And that's exactly what vector embeddings are doing. That's a form of pattern matching. So, there endeth my natural language processing lesson for today. The things you need to take away are that tokens are building blocks of data. They're chopped up in particular ways, and we create relationships between them. But why are tokens, building blocks of data, so valuable for machine learning applications? Surely, with so much data in the world, there's plenty to chop up, to tokenize. No. One reason why tokens are so valuable for machine learning is that foundation models, massive models that take heaps and heaps of data, GPT, Claude, Mistral, they require not millions, not billions, but trillions of tokens to train their model. In fact, over the last few years, and this is my own work, over the last few years we've seen an exponential increase in the number of tokens required to train AI models. Some of the figures in this graph are estimates only, because the figures aren't publicly released. But at a guess, GPT-5, which is that big yellow circle in the top right-hand corner, took 114 trillion tokens, that's trillion, and we'll look at where these 114 trillion tokens came from very soon. But how many tokens are there in all the data in the world? What a great question. And this chap, Dr. Mark Cummins at Oxford, set out to estimate that. And this link is really, really useful. It's a worked analysis of how many tokens are available on the public web. It's brilliant and understated work. He estimates that there are 60 to 160 trillion tokens of data on the open web. Basic maths. So if GPT-5 was trained on 114 trillion tokens, that's nearly 3/4 of all the data on the entire open web. Pause for effect. In fact, there's a growing realization that we've reached the token crisis. Everything that can be scraped from the internet already has been. And as Ilya Sutskever put it at NeurIPS, which is a major machine learning conference last year, data is the fossil fuel of AI, because once we've used it, there's no more to dig up. But wait, I hear you say, what about synthetic data? So one alternative to human, genuine, authentic created tokens is synthetic data, programmatically or model generated. Some of it's really useful. So if you work in industries like healthcare or medicine or pharmacology, you're tightly restricted by privacy laws as to what data you can use. So getting hold of real patient data is really problematic. So synthetic data has some uses, but more often than not, synthetic data is poor quality, and you might know it as AI slop. And that's not the end of the problems with synthetic data. I could list many, but I don't have time. Models trained on synthetic data collapse. And what I mean by that is that their outputs are constrained. They're not able to generate as wide a variety of outputs. A good way to think about model collapse is like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Every time you make a copy, you degrade the quality. You lose something at each iteration. In fact, because of the amount of AI-generated synthetic content, slop, now on the web, the internet is now completely polluted. It's harder and harder to tell human, authentic generated data from something that came out of an LLM. We've already passed peak token, the point in time when the most human, authentic generated data is available on the web. And it's getting diluted by AI slop every single day. So if you're an AI company and you're trying to scrape the web, you're now dredging up huge amounts of AI slop, and your model's probably going to collapse. So human-generated data is endangered. All of that data, 60 to 160 trillion tokens on the web, it's not enough. It's scarce, because models like ChatGPT and Claude need not millions, not billions, but trillions of tokens of data. And they've already been trained on most, if not all, of the open web. And the web is increasingly being polluted by synthetic AI data, which makes tokens rare and valuable. And because human-generated data is scarce, and because it's rare, and because it's so valuable, tokens are now contested. They're hot property. So who's getting tokens? How are they getting them? And really importantly, who benefits from them? That sounds like power questions, if you ask me. Firstly, tokens are scraped in ways that are exploitative. Do we have any SRE or DevOps folks in the room? Thank you. I'll take that as a partial yes. How many of you have had to spend time, energy, and gallons of coffee trying to block scrapers from your infrastructure? How many swear words have you used? I think that's probably a better metric. Quite a few. It's a right pain in the proverbial. You've had to spend hours and energy and time that could have been used elsewhere to try and block scrapers that had no permission to scrape your infrastructure. And token harvesting is not just exploitative of the infrastructure. It also extracts value from the data creators, the people who created the books, the art, the videos in the first place. And it's exploitative of the workers who are paid pennies to either label data or to sift through some really horrible material that could be used for content moderation. So it's exploitative all around, technically, infrastructurally, creatively, and from a labour perspective. It's extraction all the way down. And token harvesting also serves to concentrate power, meaning it's a small group of players who are shaping AI innovation. If you have a lot of data, like Reddit or Stack Overflow, then you can block certain scrapers and only allow certain companies to scrape your data in exchange for wads of cash, which is exactly what OpenAI did with Reddit and Stack Overflow. They've entered into licensing deals to give their data to OpenAI so OpenAI can train GPT on Reddit and Stack Overflow. And also, let's face it, if you've scraped 114 trillion tokens off the web, you're going to need a pretty big S3 bucket to put them in. There's not many companies who can afford that infrastructure, and it again constrains and shapes who's able to play in the AI space. This sounds very ranty, doesn't it? Another thing, all of those trillions of tokens that have been scraped off the web, they don't represent everyone. Have you ever read Reddit? Point proven. The language, the words, the sentences that are used represent a particular culture, but they don't represent everyone. The internet is predominantly English, and so harvesting all English data means that AI in the other 7,000 languages that are still spoken is inhibited. The internet is also full of biases. Surprise. If you listened to Dr. Arwen's talk yesterday, she gave some brilliant examples. And if we scrape the internet blindly and we feed it to AI models, it's going to reproduce those biases. Moreover, current approaches to token harvesting bulldoze over rights, and they don't respect things like data sovereignty or the care principles for care of Indigenous data. Language encodes culture. Language encodes history. Language encodes stories. Language encodes dreams. And if we scrape language data, we are scraping language, we are scraping culture, and we are scraping stories, and we are scraping dreams. But it might provide a few trillion more tokens, right? There has to be a better way. And we think there is. We're building something we hope can be part of the solution, part of a different way forward, a different direction than what we're going in. Something that puts power back in the hands of communities to control data the way they want to control it. It's the Mozilla Data Collective, and Chris is going to hand out some stickers. Thank you very much, Chris. So you only get the stickers if you come to the talk. We're launching Wednesday. We thought we'd be launched by now, so you might want to bookmark some of these things. We're rebuilding the AI data ecosystem with communities at the centre. And there are two parts to the platform. Data contributors who want to share their data in particular constrained ways, and data consumers who need to have really good fine-grained control of what their data supply chain looks like. So researchers and nonprofits often have a lot of data that was expensive to collect, but they don't just want to put it up on the open web because they have no control over how it's going to be used. We have creatives and media organisations, and we have governments and funders who also want a platform to put this data on. And just for David's, I'm going to go a couple of minutes over. On the other side of the platform, we have data consumers. Now, these might ordinarily be the people who are scraping the web, but they might want to find a better way, something that respects licensing, something that's more ethical. They need high-quality data sets that have been controlled and curated, and compliance professionals are really interested in where you got that data from. So the Mozilla Data Collective brings together the two sides of this market, the two sides of this platform, consumers and creators. And so what we're able to provide to contributors is a way to store and control data that puts you in control of who uses that data, where it's used and what it's used for. And it allows people to find your data through data sheets and create new value by combining your data sets with other data sets. And if you're interested in the type of information that's in our data sheets, we've just started doing data sheets for the 316 languages in Common Voice, so you can have a look at some of the data statement, data sheet work that we're doing there. And for data consumers, we provide discoverability, taking some of the pain out of finding data sets that are needed for the tasks you're working on, finding the right data set for the task, and providing you with supply chain transparency, and being able to go back to the people who created the data and say, hey, why was it created this way? What were the decisions there? And one of the reasons supply chain transparency is becoming more important is because of this. It's the international standard for managing AI systems. And I'd probably also mention the Australian regulations around AI, except we don't have any that aren't voluntary. So, to recap, authentic tokens are scarce. Token harvesting from the web is really exploitative on a number of levels. And we think there's a better way, a different way to approach this problem by bringing together data contributors and data consumers in a platform that serves both parties. And with that, I'd like you to join us. Come chat with us, send us feedback, or let us know about a data set you think should be on the platform. And with that, I'll say thank you, and I'll open up the floor to questions.
Thank you, Kathy. We have time for questions. We've got one down here.
Thanks, Ophelia.
Party here. I'm not quite getting where you're going with this. Are you only talking about a particular type of data that can be tokenized? Because there's a lot of data out there which is like geographic data and weather data and mathematical databases and et cetera, et cetera. Are you excluding all of that and just talking about human language data?
Really great question, and I apologise I didn't give a lot of clarity there. So at the moment, we're able to support text, and then we'll go on to looking at other forms of multimodal data like images, a lot more in terms of audio and spoken language. So when the platform goes live, the Mozilla Common Voice datasets or the speech and audio datasets will be delivered via this platform. I think there's some broader questions at the moment, particularly in the research data infrastructure space and all of the work that's going on around safeguarding research with the, what's a nice way to put this, with the disturbances that are happening in America at the moment. So I'm not sure that we're quite ready to host, say, the NOAA climate data or stuff of that scale at the moment. What we're really interested in are being able to partner with people who have these data sets and want to unlock them for the benefits that come through AI, but may not have the infrastructure or may not have the expertise to be able to do that, but really want to make this data available under particular licenses. Good question, thank you.
Do we have any more questions?
There's a question up the back.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Great presentation. When you brought up licensing, that was a very interesting point for me. And I think you mentioned at the moment all of them are voluntary in Australia at the moment.
Sorry, I missed the question.
You mentioned all of them are voluntary. There's standards. AI standards, yeah. I think you mentioned all voluntary at the moment, yeah.
That's right.
So that made me think of the B Corp movement where the organizations take it on themselves to get certified by B Corp, and that gives consumers a way to kind of make a more conscious choice, purchase. well, the whole ecosystem is evolving, but it's evolving so fast. I'm wondering if there is similar initiative, or if, as consumers of models, we can actually have a licensing like that, when some organizations can take it on themselves, and then we can know who's taking a higher standard, and then work with them basically as technologists and data people.
So I think there are two separate things, and I'd like to separate them a little bit in my answer. So I think one is an organisational structure, and so the collective is really a collective approach. It's about people coming together to share data in a way that's collectively beneficial. And I think I don't know enough about the B Corp to compare or contrast that with how we're operating, so I don't want to talk too much about B corporations. And I want to separate that from the licensing question. So one of the challenges we faced with language communities and common voice data is that having it as public domain, having it as CC0, is not restrictive enough for some communities who want to protect their language data. So particularly Indigenous communities don't necessarily want their Indigenous language data given to the whole entire world for free. And so we've had to think carefully about different licensing approaches for the Mozilla Data Collective that more closely align with the needs and the wishes of communities. And there's two key examples that I think are really relevant here. One is the Kaitia Katanga license that's used by people who work with the Te Reo Māori language in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so one of the organisations to look at there is Te Hiku Media. So they have a huge amount of Te Reo Māori language data, but they don't make it publicly available. It's licensed under Kaitia, which means that the benefits of the data have to go back to the community. And there's another license coming out of Africa at the moment. I'm going to mangle the long name, so I'm not going to do that, but it's called the Noodle license, the NOODL license, and it has a similar underpinning that people who use the data that's licensed that way have a responsibility to the community who created that data. So I just want to separate the organisational structure from the licensing there.
Thank you.
Great question. And there's one more question at the back. Do we have time?
We have time.
David will allow it. Thank you, David.
Hi, thanks. Great talk, Kathy. I was just wondering, I mean, it's clear the value that this presents for communities that maybe don't have like an established legal presence, infrastructure, and all of those things. I was wondering if you've engaged with, for example, the publishers of scientific journals and other organizations like this, and maybe some of like especially some of the more open journals, and to see whether there's like, have you gotten a good response from organizations like that?
Great question, Alan. Thank you. I would say that it's been variable. So we're engaging with the GLAM community at the moment, who face some of the similar challenges to the research infrastructure community about hosting and about infrastructure enablement. I would love to learn more about some of the challenges that the research space is having, and really have those conversations. So please let us know who we should be talking to.
Everyone, let's please thank Kathy again. And
My pleasure.
Kathy, please take this
Thank
mug.
you so much, David. I really appreciate it. Great job.